February 21st. Motion from Mr. Jenks, is there a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. There is no unfinished business, and the big topic today is the overview of the operating and capital budget for fiscal '24. Mr. Carr.
Thank you. Just wanted to let the board members know that you have a draft copy of this presentation at your desks, as well as, including this, also we distributed the draft budget book for FY 2024 as well. We'll be taking a deeper dive of the budget book at the Finance and Audit Committee meeting on Monday, March 27th. This is just an overview of what's included in the budget book. And we're also going to be providing an overview of the rate recommendation for FY 2024 and FY 2025 to support the implementation of RiverRenew. I do want to take a moment and thank staff for pulling together the budget book and the presentation during this transition. I want to thank Caitlin for kind of spearheading this charge over the last 6 months. Caitlin and Felicia did a lot of work with the CIP to be able to support what we're doing tonight. And I just want to make sure that they're recognized as part of their work pulling us through this transition and keeping everything consistent and on track. Budget book looks pretty similar to last year. You'll notice a few changes with the way we set up our operating budget and how we're reporting that out. So tonight we're going to I'll walk through the background of AlexRenew. I'll hit the highlights and storylines of the proposed FY 2024 budget and rate recommendation. Mr. Akinkube will walk through the 2024 budget along with the 10-year CIP. And then Ms. Fian will walk through the rate recommendation for 24 and 25, as well as some of the financial assistance programs that we're offering to our customers. After that, we'll talk about the next steps in our rate process, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Would ask, let staff get through the presentation, and we'll have a discussion once we get through the presentation. If you want to just jot notes down as we go through, we'll have a discussion at the end of the presentation around questions and answers. So just like most presentations, we always like to start with our vision, because our budget and our rate recommendations do support the AlexRenew vision that was endorsed by the board. Just want to mention that as we go through the budget book and presentation, we always keep this in the back of our minds as we look at the CIP, plan our capital work, and also look to structure our rates. It's also important to acknowledge what our budget supports. And this slide is showing AlexRenew's assets, our interceptors, service chambers, wastewater plant, and perhaps the biggest asset yet to be realized is the RiverRenew tunnel, which is under construction. And one major storyline of this evening's presentation, it is our peak year spending. $162 million of our capital budget this year is to support the RiverRenew tunnel project. As we discussed last month, we have strong fiscal principles that guide our budget and rate setting process. I'll walk through them briefly as a recap from last month when we went through our principles presentation. We look to operate a fiscally sustainable and stable utility. We recover our costs through rates. We provide transparent and timely reporting. That includes presentations like tonight's, as well as our public hearing scheduled for May. We'll talk a little bit tonight about our payment flexibility that we offer to our customers. We have the Master Indenture of Trust that we adhere to, as well as our adopted financial policies. So the Master Indenture kind of set our framework around budget and rates. In addition to that, the board also adopted a financial policy first in 2010, and then recommitted to that policy in 2021. And when we look at those financial policies, we look at four major areas. Debt service coverage, our minimum target's 1.5. Minimum reserves, 120 days of operating expenses, that's reported out. Both of those are reported out each month in our CEO report, our financial report. Pay-go funding, a minimum of 15% of the work through cash. And then budget, we're here tonight to talk about the budget. 3-year budget is included in the budget book. And we'll also talk tonight a bit about the 10-year CIP. In addition, this year, we also wanted to take a pause and talk about employee compensation in form of pay as well as health benefits. That is an important part of our budget as it does make up a portion of our operating costs. So the board established a compensation policy that looks at 3 main areas. We want to maintain comparability to other jurisdictions. We look at the mid-range of a salary and we target 90 to 110% of that range of salary. And then every 2 years, we conduct a market study to benchmark ourselves against other utilities in the region. And that may result in market rate adjustments. So what we also are showing on this slide is from FY 2019 through FY 2024, what our average merit adjustments have been. So 2019, 2.6%. 2020, the year we had COVID, they were reduced to 1%. 0 in 2021, 2.5 in 2022, 4.6 in 2023, and then 4.2% in FY 2024. This year, we also completed our 2-year market rate adjustment to look at our salary bands. So how competitive are we to others in the region with respect to our salary bands? And out of that study, a recommendation of 7.5% was included as a market rate adjustment to our salary band. So everybody's salary band, on average, adjusted 7.5%. That's important to note because you will see an increase in personnel for operating costs. That 7.5% as well as the 4.2% merit adjustment are both included in our personnel costs for FY 2024. Our budgeted costs for FY 2023 does not reflect that 7.5% since the market study was not done at this time last year. In addition to compensation, we also have an excellent benefits program to support our employees. Wait for Mr. Jinks to stop writing. I don't want to go too quickly. Okay. We also, slide 9, showing our benefits program for our employees. On the left, we're showing our medical, dental, and vision. Our medical program, and Ms. Callahan, our HR chief, is here this evening. If there's any more detailed questions, she's here and available to answer those questions once we get through the presentation. For medical, we use United Healthcare. It is a high deductible plan with a health savings account that's fully insured. Coverage is 85% for all tiers, and that includes an embedded schedule. For dental, like most other utilities, we use Delta. Cost share is 85%. Vision, United Healthcare as well, and then that's 100% coverage for vision. Off to the right, we're showing the life and disability coverage for employees, 1.5 times their salary with a max of $250,000 benefit. Cost share is 100% for short and long-term disability premiums. And then for retirement, we use the Virginia Retirement System, VRS 457. That contribution changes each fiscal year, each even fiscal year. So this is one of those fiscal years. The FY 23 rate is 8.19%. And our match is 1 to 2.5% based on the employee's contribution going all the way up to 4%. So for example, if an employee is contributing 4%, AlexRenew is contributing 2.5% to that. 1 to 1, 1 to 1%. Here's a table that we've got in our guidelines. So I want to take a moment before we get into the FY 2024 budget in detail. We want to provide a high-level overview. There are some major storylines this year. We are seeing a $3 million increase in our operating costs. That's primarily driven by our continued investment in our staff and employees. It's also primarily driven by increases in chemicals. when we talk about chemicals at this wastewater plant, we're talking about primarily methanol, hypochlorite, alum, and ferric chloride. We're also seeing increases due to our sludge hauling costs. A lot of that driven by inflation and availability of CDL drivers. Other highlights of this fiscal year are, as I mentioned, our peak year spending for RiverRenew. We're starting to see the end, we're getting to an inflection point on the RiverRenew program and starting to see the end of RiverRenew rate adjustments, looking out into FY 2028, and starting to see our other capital programs take precedent over RiverRenew. If you remember when we started RiverRenew back in 2018, we made a decision internally to delay a lot of the capital work that was necessary at the plant. Throughout this evening's presentation and in the budget book, you're going to start to see more of an inward focus back into the plant and some of the projects that we have delayed in order to implement RiverRenew. So when we talk about RiverRenew rate adjustments, we have this 2-year rate adjustment to support RiverRenew, and then 2 more after that through FY 2027. 28, RiverRenew starts to become less of a driver for our rate adjustments. I did want to make that important distinction that we're kind of looking past RiverRenew and starting to look at a 10-year CIP and start investing back in our wastewater plant. Do want to mention, we are going to talk about escalation in costs, but also showing what that means on a chart. And I'm sure the board has seen this in the news, but a lot of the drivers, when we look at escalation, we look at the consumer price indices. When we look at the consumer price indices from January of 2020, using that as the baseline, all the way until today, we're seeing about over 16% increase in those indices. And that's really an indicator of what's going on in the market. A lot of the time we're seeing increases well beyond that 16% for what we are purchasing with respect to chemicals or what we're purchasing with our construction project. This is just an average showing a trend. So looking at our budget at a very high level, our budget overview, as I mentioned, $33 million investment in our operations and maintenance budget, $11 million in our IRR program, which aligns very well with what we had last fiscal year, and then $202 million capital investment. $162 million of that is through the RiverRenew program. We like to start out with our balanced budget, and you might remember this slide from last year. This is showing our revenues on the left-hand side of the page, expenses on the right. Mr. Akinkubi is going to go through this in further detail, but I'll give you some major highlights with respect to our expenses. You can see that big bucket of capital outlay of $202 million, that $162 coming solely through RiverRenew, and then our operating expenses on the left of $33 million. On the blue chart to the left, you can see our revenues. A lot of our revenue proposed, like FY23, is through loan proceeds to support the spending on RiverRenew, $153 million of loan proceeds. And then you can also see that what we recover via rates, the wastewater treatment charges of $53.6 million, and then the Fairfax contributions to I&R and capital. You'll see an increase as well. The Fairfax contributions this year as well, because they do share in some of the RiverRenew expenses. So with the increase in RiverRenew this year, you're also seeing an increase in Fairfax contributions to the capital program. So right out of the gate, we also wanted, because everybody could sit there and do the math and calculate it themselves, but right out of the gate, we did want to show what the rate increases were proposed for FY 2024 and FY 2025 to fund RiverRenew. These are lower than we initially projected when we did rate projections 2 years ago. We were in the 6% range. For FY 2024, we're at 5.4%. That equates to like $2.71 per month for the average residential user at 4,000 gallons. And then in FY 25, it's 5.1% proposed rate increase, which equates to $2.72. Again, for that average user. It is important to note that as I mentioned, we are starting to see the end of RiverNew rate adjustment. 2/3 of this rate adjustment, 64% of this rate adjustment is attributable to the RiverNew program. The remaining percentage is to support our ongoing operations, maintenance, and capital program. If you think about that in percentage of the pie, 3.5% of the 5.4% is for RiverRenew. The remaining 1.9% is for operating and other capital investments. And we'll probably provide that clarity as we move forward out of the RiverNew rate adjustments, and we'll see a switch, like I said, in FY28 where it'll flip, and the RiverNew rate increase will be cents on the overall adjustment, looking ahead into the future. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Akinkubi to go through the proposed budget as well as a 10-year CIP.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. Again, good evening, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, members of the board. I want to use this opportunity again to introduce myself, my full name. My name is Lake Akinkubi. I am the new Director of Finance. Very excited to be on board here at AlexRenew. It's officially my physical day 21. And to have the opportunity to present and speak to you all just gives me the chills. Very excited. That being said,
Things happen fast around here.
I see that. That being said, we'll jump right into it. So looking at the FY24 total revenue or source of funding, you would see that that number is approximately $263 million, which is an increase of 18.7% from the prior year's budget. Now, the FY24 budget, similar to the FY23 budget, comprises of three major components. One is the operating revenue. The operating revenue of roughly about $66.4 million accounts for about 25% of that $263 million I was just talking about. And the operating budget includes two components. One is the wastewater charge that we get from our ratepayers. And another one, as you're all aware of, is the Fairfax operating expense charge to help with some portion of our operating expense. Another component is the Fairfax IR&R and capital contribution of $36.4 million. That accounts for about 15% of the total FY24 revenue. Again, as you're all aware of, that is, again, to help with some of the upgrades and replacement of our asset as they become due and obsolete and depreciate, as stated in the service agreement that we do have with Fairfax County. The last component, which is the biggest component, is the debt proceeds and other sources. That accounts for about 60% of the total revenue for FY24. As Mr. Carl alluded to in previous slide, again, that is primarily driven, or that primarily exists due to the ongoing RiverRenew project. And we are hitting our peak year in spending with the RiverRenew project in FY24. That's why that accounts for a big chunk of the revenue or source of funding. Looking at our operating budget, again, Mr. Carl alluded to, I believe it was slide number 11, when we were looking at the impact of inflation dating back to 2020. We continue to see a direct impact in that in our expenditures, not only on the operating expenditure, but as well as capital expenditure as well. We do have a total operating budget in FY24 of $33 million. This signifies an 8.5% increase from prior year. Again, as Mr. Carl alluded to, personnel is a big component of our operating budget. It accounts for roughly about 50% of the operating budget, showing an increase of 16.1% from prior year budget. Again, primarily driven to the market adjustment that Mr. Carl talked about, the 7.5% that was not included in the FY '23 budget, and the merit increase from FY '23 and also in FY '24 budget as well. Another component is utilities. That accounts roughly for about 16% of the operating budget. Again, that spiked up 18.5% from prior year's budget, primarily driven by electricity due to the increase in fuel surcharges that we've seen over the past 12 months. Chemicals, Mr. Carl again alluded to this earlier, that went up significantly again from prior year to the tune of 32.6%. Again, driven by CPI, the impact of CPI as well as supply chain challenges. We continue to see that result directly with making the components to make those chemicals. Operational maintenance stayed almost flat to last year's budget with a slight minor increase of 0.6. Arlington sewer disposal up from prior year, 12.4%. Again, that increase is due to a higher operating budget from Arlington. Sludge disposal up 16.1% from prior year. Again, this is the impact of inflation as we continue to see them and as we continue to as they continue to impact our expenditures. Last component is the general admin, customer service, and other. We see a decrease in that, and that decrease is primarily due to the overhaul of the customer billing and collection system, streamlining our legal, engineering and planning, as well as general support costs. So we were able to generate some savings in that category from compared to the FY '23 budget. Okay. So this slide right here just shows some of the major projects in FY '24. We do have a total CIP budget of approximately $213 million. As Mr. Carl alluded to from previous slide, AlexRenew, we are hitting our peak year in AlexRenew spending, and AlexRenew accounts for 76% of that total CIP budget. AlexRenew, as you can see, shows a total budget of $162.3 million. Again, with a total CIP budget of $212.5 million, that accounts for roughly about 76% of the CIP budget for FY '24. Another major project we have is the Commonwealth Interceptor upgrade. Again, this helps address the excess I&I that we experienced during heavy rainfall by increasing the size of one of our interceptors to help reduce basement backup. That project right now is slated to be in the design phase in FY '24 with a budgeted dollars of $3.2 million. Another major project is the preliminary primary system upgrade. Again, this is just to help improve the reliability and resilience of that system. We just have parts of that, just pretty much that project coming to its end of useful life and just need some overall upgrade on that project. Another major project is the secondary settling tank refurbishment. Again, this project is upgrades to the chain and flight equipment to help the process run more effectively and efficiently. The solid process upgrade master plan, this is where AlexRenew, we took a holistic look at that system to identify a plan and improvement plan of action, I should say, ranging from short-term to mid-term to long-term. So FY '24, as you could see, we do have a $4 million slated to spend on that project, again, ranging from the master plan outcome that we got resulting from that project. Last but not the least, again, major project is the IT infrastructure upgrade. We have various stages of that, various items, again, slated to spend about $7 million in FY '24. And this is to support or to get our system up to date in the cybersecurity aspect of the information technology. So to put that in better words, this is to help us upgrade some of our cybersecurity initiatives and like upgrades to be in line with the EPA recommended guidelines as well as best practices. In addition to that, we do have some wireless network at the plant that needs to be upgraded as well as our phone system refresh. The current phone system we have are outdated and those needs to be upgraded too as well. Okay. So now, this slide right here shows a 10-year CIP timeline from the AlexRenew 10-year schedule. Usually, from my experience and what I'm used to, engineers tend to look just towards the first 5 years and not too much the next 5 years after that. And that's not a shot at any engineers in the house. But we got AlexRenew, we all got together and look at our 10-year timeline of CIP project. Again, like Mr. Carl alluded to, River Renew right now just consumes a lot of our time, a lot of our resources from a project standpoint. And you could see again, just for the first 5 years, how that is a big component of our CIP project over the next 10 years. 3 of the projects here I already mentioned from the previous slide. I'll talk about the other 3 that I haven't talked about. Again, this starts pretty much when the River Renew project concludes in FY 26. Now it gives us time, like again, Mr. Carl said, I can refer back to him enough today to focus on some of those projects that River Renew have taken precedent over. As we complete the River Renew project, we have time now to focus on this other project. First one being the tertiary upgrade. Again, this upgrade is to maintain efficient and effective tertiary system. This is a new project currently in the design phase. That design phase will continue through FY 2026, which at that point, the construction of that project actually starts. Another one is the Potomac Interceptor. Again, needed improvements were identified back in 2015. The system currently works fine as it is. However, over the next 4 to 5 years, that we are going to need some upgrades and improvement on that project. The other one is the Holmes Run sewer rehabilitation, all the way out somewhere in between 2028 and 2029. This came from the same task order you are very used to, the task order 15, the same one the River Renew project originated from. And this is just to improve the capacity and pipe conditions there. This next slide right here gives us just a visual on our funding sources and our expenditure. It's no surprise you see your first 3 bars in each of the chart. Again, primarily high due to the ongoing River Renew project. Again, we have to, that referring back to my first slide when I talked about it, this being River Renew, we're hitting our peak year and just being the major expenditure of AlexRenew at the moment. You could see the impact of that in the first 2 years, and then start to drop down a little bit after year 2026 when we not focus, I should say, but when we start to make improvements to those other capital improvement and expenditure I talked about earlier and other costs as well. So this pie chart right here, again, this just represents the 10-year CIP expenditures. And again, now looking at this cost from a 10-year standpoint, not just FY '24, you see River Renew, both joint and Alex only, now accounts for 31% of that 10-year CIP expenditure. That 10-year CIP expenditure is roughly about 843 million, by the way. So I mean, AlexRenew just accounts for 31% of that. Another big chunk of that is the joint capital improvements that accounts for about 47% of that 10-year expenditure. That projects include the solid process upgrades, the preliminary primary system upgrades, and the tertiary upgrade that I spoke about in previous slide. All right. My understanding is the board has seen this chart before. This represents the debt AlexRenew has incurred. Again, you're very familiar with the teal colors in the bar that represent existing AlexRenew debt. The green color right there, just again, the debt, the clean water revolving loan we had to take to support the River Renew project. And the other big part, I would say the most important, like I said, aspect from this slide is the impact of the 90 million ARPA grant. And that's the dark blue color that you see on this bar, on the bar chart right here. Unlike the debt, where we have to pay that back, even though we do have a very low interest income, put in mind the grant, we do not have to pay that back. And not only does that help reduce the impact and our liability on debt, but also have a very significant and direct impact to our customer rates from what we're currently proposing, as well as, like I said, future rates. And at this time, I will turn over to Ms. Feehan to talk about the FY '24 and FY '25 rate adjustment recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Akinkupe, and good evening, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the board. I am also excited to be speaking to you on my 1303rd day, just in case we were going there.
It gets easier though.
Right. So I think all of the slides are leading up to the rate adjustment that Mr. Carl has already kind of starting out the presentation for us with. But over the course of the last 6 months, we spent a lot of time with our rate consultant who's here tonight, Raftelis, putting together our FY 2024 budget, our CIP, and our rate model to really support and frame out what would be the expected rate adjustments in the next 2 fiscal years. So as a result of that work, staff is here to present the recommendation that really supports our spending needs that Mr. Akinkupe covered. So this is our third 2-year rate adjustment to support River Renew. As Mr. Carl indicated earlier, it's a 5.4% increase in fiscal year 2024 and a 5.1% increase in fiscal year 2025. And so this equates for our customers, the average residential customer, to about a $2.70 increase on their monthly bills per year. Again, this is a 2-year rate adjustment. It falls in line with the approach that that the board set in place when we first started implementing rate increases for River Renew. And really, those 2-year rate adjustments have gone to supporting the rates that are needed as conditions have evolved, and then really supporting the funding needs and spending needs for River Renew as we're seeing the peak years. We added a pie chart that just helps to understand what's really from the River Renew standpoint, what's really driving this year's rate recommendation, the 5.4%. And you can see on the right side of the slide, 64% of this year's rate adjustment is driven by what's needed for River Renew. The remainder is what's needed for our O&M budget. and that breaks down to about 3.5% of the 5.4 is River Renew, and 1.9% is for the O&M budget. This is a graph that, for the board members who have been here with us since 2018, you've seen every year. This is our projection of what was needed to increase our rates to support the River Renew program. And so in 2018, you can see in the gray, we originally anticipated that we would need to raise rates between $20 and $40 per month for the average residential user. The rate adjustment recommendation that we're making this evening really brings us on the lower end of those projections with an anticipated rate increase of $17 per month for the average residential user by FY 2026. And the success of this story and being on the lower end of our rate projections really comes from closing our two loans at a time where interest rates were incredibly low, and then the $140 million of grant funding that we've received from the state, allowing us to really be on the lower end of the original projection. This graph just gives a little bit more of the historical context of how these rate adjustments have impacted the average residential user. And I should have said earlier, the average residential user is someone who's using about 4,000 gallons per month. So you can see since we started implementing rate adjustments in 2020, how their average monthly bill has been impacted by these rates. We're also showing projections beyond the next two fiscal years into 2026, 27, and 28. What's important to note is that in 2026, that will be the last year of what we expect to be a major increase associated with River Renew. In 2027, there will still be some incremental rate increases needed for River Renew, but the projected rate increases are driven by what's needed for our CIP. This slide illustrates what the change to our base rates for commercial and residential users look like for FY 2024 and 2025 when compared to our current existing rates, as well as the changes to the base rates. And so again, you can see at the bottom the expected or anticipated increase is about $2.70 per year for the next two fiscal years. This next slide is a slide that is similar to one that you all saw last month, but adds in the fiscal year 2024 rates and compares them against wastewater rates in the region. So when you take our FY 2024 rates and compare them across the region, we're on the above or higher end of those rates. I think it's important to note that we're comparing against rates as of February 2023. So there is a possibility that these entities may have proposed rates that just are going into effect in their fiscal year as well. And then again, this slide is similar to one from last month, but adds in our fiscal year 2024 rates and compares them across other programs or other entities that have combined sewer programs. And so when compared across other entities with combined sewer programs, we're more in line with about the average rates. While presenting on the rates and budgets tonight, we wanted to highlight the financial assistance programs that we have in place, both existing and then an update on our water fund. And so we have two major programs that are in place right now, payment plans and LIWA. Payment plans is our program that we've started back in 2016. Right now it's administered through Promise Pay. It's the ability for residents or customers who are behind on their bills to get into a payment schedule that's more extended and flexible and allows for them to pay back what's needed or what's past due. LIWAP is a program that comes from federal funding and is right now being run through the state and also actually administered as well through Promise Pay. And this is a program that supports low-income households with their water and wastewater bills. For both of these programs that are currently in place, we've been promoting these programs within our bill inserts most recently to make sure that our customers know that these programs exist and that they're there to support them in paying down their bills. And then we anticipate in the next couple of months that we'll also be sending out letters to, again, promote these programs and make sure that our customers know they can use them to be supported. And then we wanted to update or provide an update on the Water Fund program. Staff has been working with council to kind of move that program along. It was originally established in 2015 with the intent to assist our customers in need. It was funded through customer donations, contributions, and administered through the United Way as our third-party 501c3. United Way is no longer supporting us on that effort, and so we're looking for an additional or a new third party or new charitable fund to support us in distributing funds. One thing to note, our new customer portal that's will be put online through our customer information and billing system upgrade does allow for the option for customers to actually put in place or sign up for a Roundup program and then contribute to our water fund moving forward. Looking ahead for next steps for the budget and rate process, this slide shows the proposed communications plan around our rate adjustment and budget. It's really in line with communications that we've done in previous years around our rate adjustment and budget. We expect to do updates to our websites and social media, printed materials through our bill inserts. We would expect to be also getting out to information to our Revenue SAG and the Board Council Work Group, as well as a press release and printed ads and digital ads to really promote everyone's understanding that the upcoming rate hearing is part of this process and get individuals here to support us in that process. And then finally, this is a slide from last month, and really just looking ahead for what's to expect in this budget process. We're reviewing the preliminary budget with you all tonight, and then in greater depth next Monday at the Finance and Audit Committee meeting. And with that, we can transition to questions.
I know we have a lot of questions. I know Mr. Jenks has a lot of questions. But before we get to it, I really, Mr. Carl, I want to compliment the whole team. We've got totally new players here, Ms. Bean and Mr. Akanubi, and it's as clear and complete and professional a presentation as we've ever had. And so really very impressive. We have a lot of questions, but thank you for the effort that went into this. Chokes me up. Mr. Jenks, do you want to start?
Sure. Note that 87% of the operating budget increase is basically compensation. So just ask that when we get to next week, that we drill down in great detail on the increase, and so really the story of this budget is the rate increase is revenue and compensation. Although some of the other costs of chemicals and things like that are up a lot, dollar-wise, they don't amount to much. It's really, look at the numbers, it's compensation. So I think that understanding what the comparisons are, what the timing of those comparisons are, so we can see how we're off, because that's really the biggest driver of want to do? Go around?
Well, let's, why don't we address all of your questions, and then we'll just work down the line.
One of the questions I had, we could either address tonight or on Monday, and that would be how much decrease in those non-personnel items, the chemicals, whatever, have already happened. In the sense of those increases we're already seeing, like the trucking expenses, and how much is it projected? We think, well, all inflation is going to continue, and therefore we want to add to it. So I think having an understanding what the thinking was behind increasing budget year to budget year, how much is what we're already seeing, and how much is what might happen down the road. And probably at this point, probably my last question is more of a concern, and that is on the waterfront. How much did we, on an annualized basis, how much did we average under the old system that was administered by the United Way, where how much money is collected and we're able to apply to those who needed it?
It wasn't a lot of money at the time. We can get back to you on Monday with exact numbers, but it wasn't a lot.
My concern, I'm working on a memo, and I've been thinking about different ways of approaching this. I looked at a lot of this. It looks a lot like Hampton's Road Sanitation District has a program that's almost, it's United Way. It's donations. I don't think they do rounding. They have a population. They serve 1.5 million people, roughly. Chesapeake, Virginia Beach, up the Hampton Roads to produce. They only collect $150,000 a year. That's 10 cents a household. So if you figure how many households do we serve, and you have to kind of into that, we wouldn't collect a lot of money. So I'm not sure if this gets us right. I'm trying to think about, and I'll have a memo before Monday with questions and ideas of other ways of approaching this that give us more dollars to help customers rather than relying before, as we did on very little to solve what is now a much bigger problem. I'd also like to get it in that analysis. I'd also like to understand in our delinquency, very often when you see delinquent accounts, it's 0 to 30 days, 30 to 60, 60 to 90, or some range and dollar amounts that are due. So I don't know if we've got a lot of people who are delinquent 30 and 60, but by the time they get to 90, they pay off and been replaced by people who are delinquent now 30 or 60 days versus people who are 30, 60, 90, 120, and what percentage of the folks and dollar amounts that are due are folks that haven't paid us for a year. I don't have a sense from the information we've had so far. What's the dynamic of the
What's the maturity of that delinquency? Right.
because I think that makes a difference.
Is it refreshing or is it constant?
Yeah. So those are just the three points that stick out at me so far in the presentation.
Mr. Dickinson, any questions?
Well, I'll make my first question to key off of Mark's. As far as the assistance to folks in need, strikes me that most people in need are not being charged directly by us. They're tenants in rental units, and therefore the assistance is to the landlord. I'm not saying landlords have an easy time of it, but we're not getting down to the person who really feels the bite. And I think that's a reality we have to deal with. Who are we helping out?
It increasingly used to be you paid your monthly rent and that was it. And I've been asking the city housing staff what the dynamic is now, and far more, probably the vast majority of large multifamily property owners and property management firms basically have a utility charge that they pass pass on. Now, they don't have separate meters, for most of the case, they basically do, apparently the math is very hard to follow, the board tenants try to figure it out, it's almost impossible.
So they
but
wrap it in the.
They basically,
You can't, if I'm a tenant, I can't figure out what it is.
you can get, you can probably get the details, but I've been told the city housing staff barely figure out what the math is when they see it, so it's not intelligible. But landlords basically are passing along utility increases as utility charge to tenants. 10 years ago, you would have said that was a rare occurrence. And now it is apparently I knew it had been increasing, but I was surprised to find out that it is the predominant practice in the multifamily industry for mid-size to large. Small is a mishmash, and very often the small don't do that.
I look forward to your memo, see, because this is a hard one. It's a very hard one.
It's a very hard one.
And you keep in mind that the people don't pay their water treatment charges in isolation, right? They have other utility charges.
Yeah.
That we don't see.
Which is an interesting comparison, just for discussion's sake, is to take a look at what the increases are on other utilities like gas and electricity. And then that leads into another question I had on your utility costs. There was a big deal with Dominion, raised their rates significantly, went to the State Corporation Commission, and they said, well, no. So they reduced it with refunds coming back. Did that impact us at all?
No, not that we know of, but we'll double check, Mr. Dickinson. We have not seen a rebate. We work with Dominion. I think it's important to note we're a significant user of electricity with Dominion. Recently, our usage has gone down because of our PAC project that we finished 2 years ago. And sometimes we work with Dominion to, I'll use the word, turn off portions of the plant to be able to make energy available for the rest of the grid. But I have not seen us get a refund back from Dominion.
Maybe it was just for residential units, but I mean, Dominion was making a big deal of it with advertisements, how we reduced your bill after they raised it. And of course, there was my understanding the State Corporation Commission said you can't go that high, and therefore there was a payback.
Municipalities in Virginia that apply from Dominion, including authorities, negotiate a separate contract.
Okay.
Separate rates, which are generally more favorable than the commercial.
Going back, I think it was on page 7, on our fiscal policies guiding our future. I'm just curious on the debt service coverage, AGO, minimum reserves. Is that pretty standard in the utility industry? Are we more conservative, about par?
I think for highly rated utilities, these targets are very reasonable standards to target. And I think that the fiscal policies were last looked at recently in the past 2 years, and were reassessed also by your financial advisor, PFM, working with staff. And in my personal experience doing a lot of these financial planning engagements for utilities, you can see sort of a range of metrics at times, but generally, we see utilities staying above, in terms of just, I'll pick debt service coverage, for example, above a 1.5 times. And there's more to it than just a metric, obviously. And we always talk about internally when we develop the financial planning that, we look at capital reinvestment needs and all these other things. So we're not necessarily driven by metrics. It's in the fiscal policies is what we look at. But ultimately, we're trying to set it based on the cost of service that's required, the capital reinvestment needed for the system.
So with that said, we're probably we're fairly conservative as far as our fiscal policies are concerned. And
Yeah,
in better shape than a lot
yes.
or on par.
I think you're for if measured by your credit rating, you would have would be better than most, but not but definitely in line with kind of industry trends and standards and norms. But a very highly rated utility for sure. To be sure.
That's reassuring. Let's see, what else do I have? Why don't you go ahead, John, and I'll get back to mine.
Mr. Beal?
If I have a second round.
Looking past River Renew, and I'm looking at slide 20 and 22, the 10-year CIP timeline, that it looks like we've got almost $350 million here that's exclusive of River Renew. But then if we're looking at the summary of the 10-year capital expenditures, that, and maybe this is comparing apples and oranges, there's around $500 million that's exclusive of River Renew. And I'm wondering what's the disconnect there? And I think the one thing that strikes me is that once we get River Renew finished, we still have almost as much money we're going to spend in the next 10 years on capital projects. Is that right?
I guess, Mr. Beal, what was the disconnect again? Trying to follow the question.
Slide 20, the 10-year CIP timeline. The total of that is $350 million exclusive of River Renew. And then if you look at slide 22, that if I'm adding up everything except River Renew, that's over $500 million. Are there smaller projects that aren't shown on this?
So I think there's probably two ways to answer that question. I can start. When we look out into, Mr. Akankube said that engineers are not great planners looking ahead into capital program. So we do have some contingency built into our 10-year CIP budget to the tune of $50 million over that 10 years. And then in the far out years, where we're looking out in the last 4 years of the CIP, there's an additional allowance carried there for things we just don't know. For example, things we don't know, PFAS is recently a rule that came out with EPA. That might impact us in some manner. So we carry budgeted funds in the future as well. And I think in our budget this year, we carry somewhere around 80 million in those far out years. So that might be adding up to the additional delta that you're noticing on the two slides. Plus there are smaller capital projects that weren't included on the previous slide.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Eldrali?
On slide 17, and you mentioned this early in your presentation, the market adjustment is not included in this budget. Did I understand that correctly?
I guess to be clear, it's included in the FY 2024 budget.
Okay.
We've implemented it already in FY 23, but it is not included in the 13.9 million because it came after the fact of the last year's budget.
Okay. So that makes sense. The rate adjustment, the rate increase that we're talking about is 24 and 25, so the 23 isn't impacted at all. I guess my question was going to be, if it wasn't included, is that impacting the rates? But you just answered my question. Thank you.
Other questions?
I'll make one comment.
Sure.
Okay, if you got questions, go ahead.
I've got a couple. These are big picture questions, and you can answer them or save them to Monday, but let me tee them up anyway. The best slide in the whole presentation, slide 14. 5%. Now, when we were doing the projections on River Renew, if I remember, Terry,
Yes.
what were we looking at, 6.5% increases every year? So the big picture question is this slight reduction? Actually, it's not slight, it's 20% reduction. Is that due to the ARP grant, or is that due to the great rates we got on the two loans?
So it's due to both. Yeah, and I think Caitlin presented a slide earlier in her presentation that showed sort of that projection with the cone of uncertainty on the rate adjustments attributable to River Renew larger over time when originally we were developing the forecast. And over time, the big factor was getting through the bids on the construction costs and then securing all the financing and the grant funding. So it makes a big difference. The other thing to mention too is you may have recalled Mr. Akekube presented earlier the slide on the debt service, and one of the benefits you see is a reduction in the debt service in the near term, but also there's a substantial benefit based on your financial advisor recommending a reduction in the principal to maximize net present value savings from the use of that grant funding. And what I want to point out is just that how much debt comes off the tail end of the debt service. So in future years, that's going to provide a benefit to reduce the impact. So, the $90 million in grant, the interest rate helps you in all years. The $90 million in grant is going to provide more debt capacity in future years, for unidentified needs, and that's going to benefit you over a much longer period of time, both today's ratepayers and future ratepayers.
Thank you. I'm gonna have to ponder that, but huge impact of that $140 or $90 million grant, whatever, however we calculate that. That's huge. Now, the second question is more of something we can drill down on Monday with the committee, is on page 17, that reduction in the general admin, customer service, and other category. I will let my feelings be known. I'm always nervous about the new customer billing system. Because that's what that's our portal to our customer. I want to make sure we're not shortchanging that.
So I'll start, Mr. Akekube, you can kind of chime in here. What we're seeing is a decrease in these costs because we're capitalizing that work this year. We're capitalizing that work with respect to our customer billing system to get it up and operational. So we're seeing a decrease in costs from previous fiscal years. That's going to be realized again in the future once we get the billing system up and operational.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Carl. To add to what Mr. Carl said, so it's a timing thing right now, just looking at FY24, seeing that impact and reduction to the operating budget. However, on the capital side in FY23, that cost is actually included in our actual spend in FY23 and a little bit in FY24. So that cost is going to come back gradually to the operating budget. But to your point and your question, sir, no, we're not shortchanging customer and billing process.
Because, one of our neighboring jurisdictions had a little trouble with their billing system. And IT projects always tend to be more complicated than you think, right? So maybe this is a topic for a much different meeting, but
We are planning, we're working through the process right now with the team. We were planning to brief the board in May on the status of the billing system implementation. I think our biggest challenge is looking at whether or not account numbers will have to change. That could bring in a larger headache with respect to the billing system. So we hope to have an update on you for the board at the May meeting.
so we'll wait till then. But I just thinking about what happened at WSSC. These things are always more complicated than they appear. Good, but all in all, just a great presentation. A lot of data, very well done. Thank the team. And done very quickly too, right? I mean, you pulled this together in a matter of weeks, right? Ms. Pien?
We start our process back in August, September with at least the CIP, but it's been a really exciting learning opportunity for me. So I think it's been fun, and especially as Mr. Akekube has come on.
Sure.
I do have another question. Be on the 10-year CIP timeline. On the Commonwealth Interceptor upgrade project, total cost in there of $73 million. If we assumed we're going to absorb that,
Currently, yes. For budget planning purposes, yeah.
I'm sorry, for planning purposes.
Yeah. Much more discussion
Yeah,
will
okay.
ensue.
Okay, fine. The other, we've talked from time to time about reuse of water. Maybe someday extending lines down as this valley gets filled up to export our water for users. And that, I think, is reasonably within a 10-year time frame. Or is it premature to be thinking about something like that?
So I think primarily the major use of reclaimed water is going to be to support the completed tunnel system. We are using a lot of the reclaimed water system to support wash down of the screens and components associated with the tunnel system. We are not yet seeing a demand for reclaimed water. If you remember back in 2015, 2016, there's a stub line of reclaimed water right out here in Holland Lane that is there for a future extension. We are just not seeing the demand. We don't have a golf course nearby or somebody that immediately has a need for reclaimed water. It's something that we participate with water reuse. It's a national association. Allison, who's here, is a board member in the Mid-Atlantic area, but we just do not see a demand for the reclaimed water at this time. So we're using it obviously for our services at the plant, and AlexRenew will become a big user of reclaimed water.
The last one,
Waste energy plant.
waste energy
At one point,
plant.
there was discussion of basically they use a whole lot of water to boil to run during the generators. Running the line, I think it was going on Eisenhower Park, because there at the end is potentially a big user.
We haven't seen the use at this time.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
they haven't called for it, but yet we're gonna see further development down that valley. And just something on the future. The last one is, just reading the newspapers up in Arlington, talking about increasing densities up there. And then there was some screed about the capacity of their plant. And I was wondering if that's gonna impact us, either what their charge is going to be to us, or what they can handle. We still have an agreement that it's not been upgraded for a while.
We reported out on this at last meeting, and Mr. Dickinson, thanks for asking the question. We are working with the county to execute a revised agreement. The current agreement dates back to 1977. And we're going through and updating the agreement. It's a template that Arlington is using with both Fairfax and AlexRenew and the city. We have a 3 MGD capacity share of that wastewater plant. That's what's included in the revised agreement. That was included in the original agreement. Right now, on average, we use about 1.6, 1.7 MGD of that capacity. Projecting out, Mr. Jenks, answering your question from last month, projecting out to, using COG data, projecting out to 2030, we're looking at more of a 2 MGD use of that capacity. And working with Aaron and city staff, there is some, within that drainage area, there are some improvements to some of the small area plans. Alexandria West, small area plan, has a range of additional use of up to 0.9 additional MGD over the 2 that we're projecting. So that would put us at our capacity share if we do get that density in the Alexandria West small area plan. There's a range, but the upper range is 0.9. So we're staying with our capacity share of 3 MGD through the agreement. We did look at potentially reducing it, Mr. Jenks.
I mean, what I read was, someone just screaming about, I don't know if the allegations were true or if they have any substance. But I figured folks you're dealing with in Arlington would indicate to you that they're gonna need more capacity. And either they're gonna build it, if they build it, what's the implications to us?
That has not been conveyed to us through the negotiations. We still have a 3 MGD.
And one last small one. When it comes to, this is really a question, I guess, for our attorney. we have to make advertisements in the public newspaper. And when I look at the newspaper that we put in, Gazette, which is the usage of the Gazette, the circulation must be way down.
It is.
And are there alternatives that we have to publish in a paper, but is it defined which paper we have to do it in?
So the Virginia Water and Waste Act states that we have to use a local paper that's in circulation in our community. So the Gazette fits the bill, but in the past, we've also used the Washington Post. In addition to that, we also run ads, like advertisements, where they're, is it GIF or GIF? Either. You know, GIFs of little moving pictures.
Right.
To promote the rate adjustment and promote the public hearing.
Okay, if we're using other alternatives in addition, that's
We do.
Where do you advertise?
Sorry?
Where do you advertise?
We've had good success with AlexNow, for example, online.
Yeah.
We also use the Gazette packet.
Okay.
Alexandria Times is another
Okay.
paper we've used locally.
Well, I picked that up because that's the one that you put in there.
That's just the notice.
Yeah, right.
One comment.
One more question, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I've got to disagree with you. The best slide on here is slide 26.
You're equally enjoyable.
Oh, yeah,
They're equally enjoyable.
With COVID and supply chain and inflation
it's amazing.
and the schedule constraints we had, that we have been able to bring our bill impacts down to this level from what we projected. Says a great deal about our staff and our consultants. And it's really amazing.
Before we move off this topic, Shahram or Aaron, do you have questions? And you're cordially invited to attend the subcommittee meeting on Monday if you want to drill into the budget. Okay. That'll be an exciting meeting. So. Good. Well done. Well done by the new team. Very well done. Okay, let's move right on to item 6B on the agenda. Registration of AlexRenew and AlexRenew as fictitious.
I'll take this one. Yeah, so we currently have a doing business as registration with the State Corporation Commission for Alexandria Renew Enterprises. However, we, in our branding and other ways, we use AlexRenew Enterprises. So this is just a simple process of registering the two additional names that we use with the State Corporation Commission, and it's a $10 application fee, and it doesn't change our official name in any way. It just allows us to use those without any confusion as to the fact that they've been filed with the State Corporation Commission.
So, in light of the other expenditures we're looking at, I think we can swing this one.
Up to $20.
Down deep.
Any discussion by the board?
But we still officially have to use authority in our name.
When we are doing legal documents, bond documents, things like that, you have to use the official seal. But for branding, for things that aren't, you can use any of the other names that, particularly after we register them.
You still have to, at least I find I still have to explain when we're an enterprise, people think we're a public or a private corporation.
Correct, yes. And I think that's why staff have been moving away from including enterprise in a lot of the materials.
By the way, this is very smart. This is very smart. Before somebody steals it.
Sure. And for fictitious names, you can have somebody else name that. They don't govern that. They will just be on record as having these names. So it's not like a domain or a copyright or anything like that. It's just a registration saying we're going to be doing business as these other names. So somebody else could come in as AlexRenew.
Could we get a copyright on the name?
What we will do is, so we're getting ahead of ourselves, but we're gonna talk about a budget and board retreat in August. You know, we are looking at moving away from the Big Dipper logo for AlexRenew Okay. And that's part of the new logo, which is the swoops, the RiverRenew swoops, that we would register, trademark and register that mark. So nobody could use it that way.
By the way, I
And we work with the Wirewoods to do that.
Yeah, because
And
this
keeping-
filing's not gonna do any part of
Right.
that.
We want to make sure we keep our domain name, because someone will grab that and hold it for hostage.
Okay, we need to vote on this, correct? Do you have a motion to approve?
So move.
Mr. Dickinson, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Moving right along to the monthly outcomes, Mr. Carl.
I just want to point out some highlights with the RiverRenew program. There's been some major milestones that have been reached over the past month. If you've driven by Duke Street, you've seen that we've opened the front corner drive aisle at AVR. We did work with AVR we met that milestone to open that front corner drive aisle up per our agreement. So that was a major win for the team, even though it may seem small. Vacating that area, as you remember, was one of the biggest challenges in constructing the project, was getting through that area, keeping the hotel open and building the outfall sewer through that area. So we're out of that area in line with our agreement. We are still staged within Hoof's Run performing work on the interceptor. Another major achievement is we finally started pile driving at about 5 o'clock today at Outfall 1. We started driving our first pile from 5 to 6 p.m. this evening, so pile driving has now commenced.
We started at 5 o'clock this evening?
Yep. They were eager. So we started this evening at 5 p.m., drove our first pile. So that's underway. So we are now actively driving piles for the next 4 months at
We
Pendleton
stopped
Street.
at 6.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
They got it stood up, got it tapped in a little bit. So we're gonna now move into that period where we're gonna, potentially hear concerns from the community regarding noise with respect to pile driving.
When is the sip and see for Pendleton? Is that Tuesdays?
It's the first one it was today. And we're gonna be doing special editions, so you'll see people out there tomorrow.
I would encourage board members that can perhaps swing by.
I did earlier today, hoping to hear the pile driving. I thought, this is amazing.
No, you can hear it.
I'm just too early.
I think looking at page 2 of the RiverRenew dashboard, it is important to note. If you look at the bottom 2 pictures, what we're doing at the plant, and it's unprecedented in the amount of operations we're doing to support the tunnel project. We're actively building, if you look in the bottom left picture, that's to support the conveyor coming out of the tunnel boring machine. We're installing a vertical conveyor. At the same time, we're drilling piles. And we just finished a microtunnel drive with Marguerite, who's shown on the bottom right photo of this slide. It's also important to note, with respect to the remote sites, we're pretty much on track at the remote sites, but we are continuing to fall behind on the waterfront tunnel. We're about 7% behind. That equates to about 60 days. That's all critical path impact. So at this time, we're 60 days behind schedule with construction of the overall project. We will try and mine at higher rates to make up that time, but at the point of diminishing returns and risk, we have to start evaluating our schedule long term and look at that July 2025 date. I think I also want to note, Marguerite is highlighted on the back of the board dashboard. That entire drive is complete. She finished over the weekend. But just like Hazel, we wanted to give our other TBMs some love. So Marguerite's a 6-foot machine, built a 76-inch machine, built a 6-foot pipe, 500-foot long. Local artists we engaged to do the artwork on the side of Marguerite, really improved morale on the site, and staff really enjoyed getting to take a look at smaller version of Hazel, who's remote control.
Question, this is gonna be, Marguerite's gonna be working on the post run?
From bridge to bridge, from the north bridge to south bridge. So where you can see out the window all the way to the south bridge.
Okay.
She already built the pipe, it's done. She completed it.
And does she put
It's-
liners?
It's similar, it's similar. It's called microtunneling, so the machine itself is remote controlled.
Yeah.
And then instead of putting in segments, you're putting in sticks of pipe. 16-foot long sticks of pipe, and you push off the back of that pipe. Same idea, but we're putting in it's
Thank you, because I thought it was gonna be open cut all the way.
from the bridge to Duke Street, it will be.
Okay, thank you.
The reason it was not open cut here is because we had no laydown area, and the design builder wanted to use that area to lay down where they built microtunnel.
So to bring this back to the picture on page 4. That purple length of pipe that parallels Holland Lane. From Jamison Avenue basically to where it takes that slight bend, it was already done.
The piece at the plant is built, the very, very bottom part. The very, very, very bottom part, closest to AlexRenew, is finished. Yep, it goes north and then takes a bend to the east. That piece is done,
That piece, 500 feet.
yes. We have to do the open cut work through the park next.
Okay.
So Marguerite, she wasn't specially built for us.
No, she was built in 2006. She moves around a lot.
Oh, okay, so she's gone, or will be
I don't know
gone?
if she's out of the hole yet.
But she's done.
She's done. No issues.
Thank you.
Could you remind me why we're 60 days behind?
Yeah, so
Apologies if you've mentioned this.
oh, I haven't. Two different events have caused delay to the schedule that we have not been able to recover from. The first was back in January of '22. There was a shortage of concrete while we were sinking the two big shafts at the plant, the 72-foot shaft and the 40-foot shaft. There was no cement in the area. That delayed our concrete pours to sink the shafts that were needed to launch Hazel. Compounded on top of that, the additional delay was shipping from Germany. Two issues happened. One, Hazel's manufacture was delayed due to a COVID outbreak at the plant, so they had to shut down. We had trouble finding chips. That delayed her shipping even further, and then the war actually delayed our shipping date. So she arrived late, and compounding those two delays, all of that works on what we call the critical path. That delays the overall project schedule.
So we were hit with a worldwide pandemic, a war, and supply chain issues, and we're only 60 days behind.
Currently.
By the way, government shut down.
So,
Mr. Carl, I'll leave it up to you and your team to come up with what is the plan now that I think we're relatively certain that there will be some delays, which are totally understandable. How we want to communicate that out.
Well, I think first,
I'll let you work on that.
yeah, I think yes. I think first, we have a law that's required to be met. We cannot change that law ourselves. We would have to work with our consultant and General Assembly to craft a letter to give the GA a heads up that we are behind schedule, and that might impact the overall completion date of the program. And we would also want to inform our city partners, the Riverkeeper, the community, about any letter that we would send out to the GA. And we would have to go back into next year's session to make any change to the July 1st, 2025 date.
Couldn't be, they do have a short session coming up in the budget. That's not the time to do it.
We got a lot of groundwork to do with the elected officials.
Okay.
Like before Senator Stewart gets the letter, he needs it face to face.
Exactly.
I think maybe the chair and Justin, who knows who else, explaining, maybe I would think about something about how do we spin the positive on it. We're having tours of the tunnel on May 6th, inviting the General Assembly members up and say, you know, we're making all this progress, we've done all this stuff. In spite of X, we're only behind by 60 days, but that does raise an issue. We're gonna try to make it up. But I think it's kind of not saying we need an extension now, but we're gonna do the best we can, but we may be coming to you if it's not possible to make up that time.
We are working on a tour, being in that it is an election cycle for the delegates. We were looking at late April, early May for a potential tour, knowing that primaries are coming up in June. So we are thinking about inviting the Alexandria delegation, Senator Stewart, up for a visit and a tour of the tunnel.
Now, we have a city council work group meeting coming up.
On the 19th.
Is that an opportunity to begin to surface this? I'll let you and your team come up with a plan.
I think the story is, you know, we are behind schedule. We've done what we can with respect to float in the schedule to make it up by looking at efficiencies in the schedule. The only way to make up time now is through production and mining, or looking at things like double shifting, things like that. So, I mean, that's where we're at. I think the right approach is to kind of, you know, pen a letter to Senator Stewart, as Mr. Jinks noted, explaining that, you know, this is where we currently are. We may need to extend the timeline and see where we go from there.
Well, we're talking about, we've done a lot of excavation on all the sites. Have we uncovered anything of interest?
I wish. No, we did not, thankfully.
Thank God.
All the shafts are excavated. We didn't hit a boat. We did not uncover anything.
How about contaminated soil?
Yep. What we anticipated.
But it's where you thought it was.
Um,
There was some up in Pendleton.
all of the soil outfall 1. We are encountering what we anticipated in the baseline report, and it's some additional soil, some additional contaminated soil that we did not account for.
Oh, okay.
I'd suggest that any letter you think about visuals to go with it. There's nothing better than a picture. Tell a story. See how much progress has been made and how much good faith this organization and others have put into getting this thing done. I think that's, we have to somehow kind of educate enough to cut off the initial rhetoric and pounding at the table. It'll happen because it's election season.
Exactly.
Also on that point, I'm a frequent user of the libraries in town. They have literature on everything, but I don't see Renew there. Our annual report, I think, is first rate. And if you have extras, get them down there.
Good idea. Is there any further discussion on the outcomes report or the financial?
Chair, I would also suggest, I think that it's better to take the offense on bad news rather than the defense.
Always.
So I think that figuring a way for the next stakeholder meeting, figuring out the messaging for the city council meeting is very important. And also, who knows first, who knows second, before it rolls out in a public meeting. That's important.
Very specifically, do you think we should wait until that meeting with the mayor and vice mayor, or should we do that before? So that's April. That's already the 19th of April.
I think we're ready to getting the message ready and knowing how to frame it, how to present it, so that it gets the best possible reaction. That's first, and then I think is where does it best fit once you have that. Until then, there are challenges. We lost some time. We're hoping to make some of it up. We're working on it. We'll be back to you. I think that's, and you're foreshadowing you got a problem without saying.
And I wouldn't even present it as a problem. This is a more realistic assessment of a schedule in a $650 million project.
Projects
And the
always
fastest in
fall
the country.
behind schedule because there's always the unexpected.
And also emphasizing that relative to other CSO projects elsewhere in the state and in the country, we probably have the most aggressive schedule.
Mr. Carl, I'll let you develop that plan and strategy. There's a lot of moving pieces to it. Good, good. Any other discussion on outcomes?
I do have a quick question. I'm noticing hopefully a trending down for delinquent accounts. Is that because of the new programs coming online, or is it just one of the random fluctuations of?
It's been fluctuating month over month. We're around that 900,000 number
So it's
for the
not
last few months.
hopefully a beginning of a trend?
No, but I think our plan is to issue, a letter encouraging the delinquent accounts to make use of our payment plans and or LIWOP if they comply with the guidelines is one approach. We're trying to get that out within the next month as part of this rate process and rate setting process. And once we get the customer, we initially talked about shutoffs. We don't want to go down the road of doing shutoffs while we're implementing the new billing system. So we want to wait. Any letters around shutoffs wouldn't happen until after we implement the billing system, which likely would be, early next year.
Early of 2024.
When billings do go out, do you put something on the outside envelope to say, this is urgent, your attention is needed? I mean, when I get correspondence containing tax material, it's usually stamped on the front. This is tax material. In other words, I'm just not gonna put it in my routine file. I'm gonna pay attention.
We'll have to check with GCWW on what they end up doing on the outside of the bill.
I mean, just a rubber stamp.
I guess the last item for the board, Mr. Hill, you asked us to come up with a revised list for HOAs, so that's in the info tab. We
Thank you.
focused on 5 key HOAs.
Ideal Old Town civic president, let him know I was, the person I know, Steve, I didn't hear a word back from him.
Rosemond's very interested in a couple of topics, and every board member has a spot. Thank you for that. So, now the next topic is request for availability. A lot of things coming up, very important things going on. Mr. Carl, you want to say a word about the planning retreat or the strategic planning retreat in August? I know that's a busy time for vacations, but it might be a good time to have a planning retreat.
Yeah, so what we wanted to do this year is have an August board retreat and revisit. It's a Friday night dinner and then a Saturday session with this group and our executive team at AlexRenew. And what we want to do this year is revisit, it's been quite some time. We want to revisit the 2040 vision and potentially look out further. And then update our mission, vision statement, and revisit our strategic outcomes. So it'd be what we want to do in August is a facilitated session to take a look to make sure we're current with what we're using with respect to our mission, vision, and values. So that would include a Friday night dinner followed by a Saturday morning session. We try and start here around 7:30 and have everybody out of here by 3. With a break
The
for lunch.
reason that is important is think about how strategic outcomes factor into all of our presentations. They factor into performance plans, they factor into how the monthly outcomes report is put together, how budget presentations are put together. And they've served us well, but I think in light of all the changes going on, we probably want to revisit them. Sure. Because they've been the same for 5+ years. I think it's a good use of a Saturday morning and a Saturday mid-afternoon, so. Mr. Carl, you're not looking for an exact date right now.
I think
but
that we're
just
putting
begin to
the,
think
the,
about it.
the ask out to the board to discuss dates. Mr. Hill, if you could, get feedback from the board and let us know what might be feasible. We don't need to do that this evening.
Just let me know. Think in terms of front of the month, back of the month, or the middle of the month, because it is vacations planned and that sort of thing. But definitely August, right? we
Yeah,
have
because it's an
board meeting.
off-board month. We don't meet that month.
I will send a note around and call you, but look at your busy schedules.
Two other items would be setting up a date for the September governance meeting where we want to take a look at the board self-assessment, some governance items in September, and then since we are in a rate setting year, looking at potentially doing another finance and audit committee in October.
I
If
will let Mr. Beal handle governance and Mr. Jenks handle the budget and finance and audit committee. I encourage you to have a meeting. An energetic.
the October finance and audit committee meeting, we usually do that around the ACFR.
Why don't you suggest, Bill, how does this sound? Would you suggest a date?
Okay,
And then we can check and see
we
what
can do that.
that works for you, that works time-wise in relationship to other
We can do
meetings,
this.
and then we'll let you know whether it works or not.
Is there any further discussion on that? Okay, I would like to make a motion to go into a very brief closed session. Pursuant to section 2.23711 of the Code of Virginia, I move that the board of this authority enter into a closed meeting. And of course, the authority for this meeting is found in 2.23711A subsection 1. And the purpose is simply to discuss some topics related to employment and performance for certain officers of AlexRenew Enterprises. Do I have a second? Second. All in favor? Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the first day of spring.